Have you ever opened a pattern and felt like you were trying to read a foreign language? Well, today we're going to decode the mystery and help you turn patterns into the guide to your creativity. This is a continuation of our series on how to make garments. So excited to be teaching you the basics on how to read and understand a pattern today. I have a class handout that will be available online, and stay tuned to find out what next week's class is going to be.
Thanks. All right, so we have the big four patterns: Simplicity, Butterick, McCall's, and Vogue. Those have recently filed for bankruptcy. Ugh. After Joann's, the market collapsed out from under them, and we don't know what's going to happen with them. Sometimes when they get picked up by another company and business continues on like nothing happened, and I'm really hoping that's what happens. So I did want to talk about the difference between the big four and the indie designers. A lot of indie designers sell only online. We're lucky to have Folkwear here in the store. They're a pattern company that does patterns from around the world and all over history that look timeless. So some of them, you look at it and you're like, that's a costume. But some of them, you're like, that's just a cute dress, right? Because our modern styles are inspired by the historical patterns. And then there's also like Friday and like, who else? Little Lizard King. Yeah. So there's a ton of smaller companies that all do this. Yeah. So often the sizing on these is based on your measurements. So if you look on the back and you say, I'm normally a 12, I can almost promise you, you're not a 12 in the patterns. You gotta take your measurement. I find the big four are built with extra ease. We're gonna get to that in a little bit, but ease is the amount bigger that the garment is than your measurements. So 40-inch hips and a 3-inch ease, it's gonna be 43 when you're finished. Now, a lot of people find that the big four have too much ease for the modern fit that they're expecting. That's why sometimes you make something and it's a little too thick.
Pattern sizes are
not
same
clothes
as
sizes.
department store sizes.
Yeah,
They're
that's where your problem
different.
is. With the indie designers, it's gonna vary, right? Their fit is gonna be different based on the line. With Folkwear, they often even have a modern fit and a historical fit in the same pattern. So if you are going for the more historical look, like I usually am, I wanted to fit like a Victorian, but that Edwardian blouse is really just a cute blouse with lace insert and entredot. You would want to wear that as a modern style, and that's going to be a looser fit with a lower waist, and they take care of that for you. So just that kind of information is always going to be found on the back. Instructions can be brief or assume prior knowledge. Again, on the indie designers, sometimes they're very beginner friendly. Sometimes they assume that you know everything. It just depends on the designer. Now, there is a product that I did not put into my slideshow called a Ditto. It's made by Singer Projector. So it puts your pattern down on your fabric so you can cut it out. That's an interesting situation because instead of having to fit everything into an envelope like you see with these patterns, they just give you a PDF. They go into every single detail that you feel like you might want to know because they're not wasting paper. As far as sizing goes on those units, you put in your measurements, it drafts the pattern to fit you. So it's going to make those adjustments for you instead of you having to manually do them. Paper format, tissue paper, you have to cut really carefully. Some of these are printed on the newer indie things. Some are printed, some are PDF only. Some have thick paper that doesn't rip as easily, like Folkwear. You may have more variations, but so what they're talking about with that is on this pattern, you can do it with this kind of collar, this kind of collar, this kind of hat, this kind of hat. So it's one pattern, but it has different variations. A lot of the time on the big four, you'll have, like on this one, how many variations are there? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different variations in the same pattern. And then the seam allowances, typically here in the US, it's 5/8 of an inch. But on these, they vary, but it'll say on the pattern. And then when I make my own patterns, I do 1/2 inch. So these are going to be standard across the board. The indie patterns, you're going to have to check. So we get on the difference between indie patterns and the big four. And we're all hoping the big four pull through somehow. I know I am. All right, talking about the pattern envelope. Sizing and fit. We already talked about this a little bit, but the size on the back of the envelope is not the same as the size you would go look for in a department store. As Laura pointed out, often they're
Your pattern size is bigger than your department store size. There we go.
right. So we're always going to take our measurements and check on this chart.
Always.
Always. Now, you might be looking at this chart, and I have a huge problem. I'm sure a lot of people do, where like my bust is like over here, and my hips are like over here, right? As long as they're on the same pattern envelope, you can grade that curve. So you're going to measure each part of the body, and we're going to pick which line we're following as we go through. You can get away with a lot. You can't always get away with everything, but we can get away with a lot that way. What I really like about one of the things I like about folkwear patterns and some indie patterns is on the big four, you might have only one size in the envelope, or you might have like a split. It'll be 6, 7, 8, and then like 10, 12, 14. So if you have an 8 bust and a 14 hip, that's 2 different pattern pieces, you can't make it work. But a lot of the indie designers, it's like all in one. So that's another kind of advantage. Then we talk about ease, which is the difference between your body and how much room you're going to have when it's finished. And they'll let you know, usually on the back, but sometimes on that first page of instructions. Feel free to open these and look at them. Fabric and notions. So the back of your envelope is very conveniently going to tell you what you need. This is your suggested fabrics. And then your notions. Your notions are your zippers, your buttons, your specialty things interfacing that you may need to finish the garment. That is so when you buy your pattern, you can walk around the store like this and find all the stuff you need without having to take your pattern apart. So that's just a great reminder, is that you can find those things really easily on the envelope itself. And then pattern views. We just talked about that on the last screen as well. But different variations may come in the same pattern. And while it might show pictures on the front, your best bet is to flip it over. And there's a line drawing. These line drawings on most patterns, not all patterns, are often a little bit more clear on details like where the darts go, your different length options. So what it shows on the front, there may be expanded stuff on the back. So that's always a great thing to check out. So before you start your pattern, read all of the instructions. All of them.
The voice of experience.
The voice of experience. You can hear the pain. This is for a couple of reasons. First of all, there may be a term or an item in there that you don't know. And if you're at the store and you're shopping, or if you have time to see us, we can probably explain it to you or help you out. But if it's 3 a.m. and you're trying to get this done, you and the internet are gonna have to have that discussion. So it's a great thing to read it all the way through and be like, yes, I know what all these things are. And absolutely, I don't mind if you come in here and you're like, what? I got you. The other reason I like to read all of my instructions before I go through is because sometimes the pattern does things differently than I like to do them. And if I'm following along blindly, I may be too far into that process to back out. Like most patterns will tell you to make your sleeve a tube and make your shirt a tube and then sew them together. I like to lay this flat and open, sew my sleeve curve in, and then sew one long line all the way down. So I know that's how I like to do it. So if I read the directions first completely, I can be like, nah.
Just like cooking, you improvise a little.
Yeah. So the other advice I would give you is to highlight your pieces. So let me show you what I mean for that one. So we're gonna look. This is what your pattern layout looks like, right? And it's a lot. So you're gonna go through and you're gonna say, okay, I'm doing only view B. I'm not doing view A. I'm doing view B. Some pattern pieces are gonna be in both views. Some pattern pieces only belong in one. So to help you from accidentally cutting out stuff from view A that you don't need for view B, you're gonna get a highlighter and you're gonna mark the names of all the pattern pieces that you need. And then as you do them on your layout, you're gonna mark them off that you did them.
Hey.
Right? And then, like I said, if you're like, oh, I really want to make this pattern again and I'm going to do view A later, just get an erasable highlighter and hit it with your iron with no steam. Because if it's erasable, what they really mean is friction, heat. So if you do it with a dry iron, it'll vanish and you're good to go for the next time. Now, these pattern pieces, A, B, as they're named, are going to also appear through your direction. But as we're cutting, as we've laid out these pieces that we've numbered and we've highlighted and we've put on our fabric and we've cut them, I leave the pattern piece pinned onto the fabric until I'm ready to sew it on. So that if I have to step away from my sewing room and I come back and I'm like, is this the collar front facing or the collar back facing? It's not a guessing game anymore. It's pinned to it still until I sew it in.
And I have done it where I have used the friction pens.
Oh yeah,
to label
you can just
as
mark
well.
your pattern
Yeah.
piece. Absolutely.
Because if I had to like cut out a second thing of that
Mhm.
same thing, I've labeled the first one and I have
it behooves you to know exactly what you cut until
Yeah.
it's secure.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. So on these patterns, you're going to have a lot of symbols. Okay, so a notch. A notch is the little triangle on the edge of the pattern. Feel free to open your pattern and look for one. This is a notch. And a lot of people want to cut in. You want to cut out. Or mark it with a pin. Then you don't have to mark the notches at all. So you would cut along the line, you wouldn't cut your notch.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would get a pin or a piece of chalk and mark.
Before you cut it.
Well, after you cut it, but before you take your pattern piece off.
So it wouldn't actually be an extra flap. It would just be
Marked on your
marked on
fabric.
it that that's where a notch is.
Because some people, and I know apparently no one in this room, because they would have let me know by now, have like a personal vendetta against notches and cutting them out. And like, it's a very emotional thing for them. So I'm giving you permission to pursue alternative methods if that stresses you out. So our notches have a secret meaning, okay? So typically in most patterns, one notch indicates the front of a garment. 2 notches is the back of a garment. 3 notches is usually this like a center line. And you would do the 3 triangles, or you would do the triangles of different sizes, or you would actually mark them that way.
I'm sorry, you said the 3 triangles are
The center. Typically. For most patterns, right?
Then there's always one in the mix that has
And
to
then-
throw you up.
I know. There's always one. But that is something that can also help you identify pattern pieces and where they're supposed to go if things get a little mixed up. We have a couple of cool tools. So if you are a marker person, this was the original Mark Be Gone. Some of them you dab with water, some of them evaporate over time. I always pick the wrong one. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. This is the new version. They're friction pens. You mark them, and then when you hit it with an iron, they fade away. 2, we have Taylor's chalk. Taylor's chalk is different than traditional chalk. It's got a little more wax, so it sticks a little bit better to clothes. The idea is that you're going to brush it off when you're done. Always test your fabric first. Some fabrics don't want to let go of their relationship with the Taylor's chalk. I find myself using Taylor's chalk more than almost anything. It's very versatile. It shows up on a lot of fabrics. It marks a little bit easier. You're not having to carve into your fabric as hard. And then I found these. They're Taylor chalk pencils
Oh.
with all the colors. And then it's like clicky clicky and you can make them anyhow. I love chalk and it's an underutilized thing. But if you've never used chalk and you've always used pens, I would give it a try. And you'll have an opportunity to give it a try in class. All right, notches, squares, and triangles. So once you open your pattern up, there are all kinds of little things. So typically, a dot or a star is going to indicate where something is going to begin or end. So it might show you where your pocket is going to go on your final garment. It might show you where the zipper starts or ends on your garment. And sometimes you don't find out till later. On this pattern, we have random dots with no explanation. So you're just going to dutifully mark them. And then as you go through those instructions, which you've already pre-read, so you already know what these dots mean. You read your instructions already. that you'll be prepared, like we'll be like, okay, on pattern piece M, use the dot to align your ribbon embellishment or your pocket or whatever it is. So that's another great reason to read the entire instruction packet before you get started, right? Darts, I don't know if anyone has a dart on theirs. A dart's gonna look like a little triangle. And we will be dealing with those when we do the shirt. There's a lot of way to mark darts to make them easier to sew out. But we are marking them as we cut. Everything you mark as you cut or before you cut. Let's talk about grain line. It's not optional. So when you have a bolt of fabric, and the anatomy of a bolt of fabric, there are a couple things to be aware of. This is the selvage. It's the raw edge of the fabric. It doesn't unravel. It's usually woven extra tight on the edge. And it is going to indicate your grain line is going to be parallel to the selvage. So your grain line goes like this. So if you see this fuzzy texture on the end of something, you know that your grain line is going to go parallel to it, right? And that's important because the grain line is typically the least stretchy direction of the fabric. Some parts of your clothes you want to stretch. Some parts of your clothes you do not want to stretch. And that grain line is going to help you manipulate your fabric in that way. Yes.
So if you've cut off the selvage or you got it thrifted and it was already cut off, is it just a full test? Which one pulls more? Is the
I would do a full test. Yeah. You want the least pulley direction.
Peaceful.
The bias is the 45-degree angle against the grain line in either direction. That is the most stretchiest direction of the fabric. And sometimes you want it to stretch. So let's talk about where grain line would go on a finished garment. You don't want this to stretch, because then the point of your shirt is going to eventually like swoop down and stretch out and like manipulate that way, right? So you can see this is the grain line here. On a sleeve, typically the grain line is going to go from your shoulder to the wrist on the top. So this curve of it going into the sleeve is going to stretch a little bit. So on fitted sleeves, where there's no difference between the shoulder and the sleeve, that's how you ease it in. So when do you want something to stretch? When you need to squish one shape into another shape? Or when the garment needs to slink against your body? So for example, in a bias cut gown, it's called a bias cut gown because instead of the grain line going like this, like you would expect, it's like this everywhere. So when you look at it on the hanger, it doesn't look like much, right? But when you wear it, it just skims all of your curves perfectly because it's made to stretch and move with. And so the grain line on the pattern is going to make sure that the structure is holding where it needs to hold and stretching and conforming against you where it needs to. So the number one mistake I see new sewers make in garment is just to lay their pattern out in a way that saves fabric. Yes.
You can choose one. Save fabric or save sanity.
Yes. So every pattern piece from big to small is gonna have grain line. Most of them are even labeled grain line because it is so important. So if you've ever made a garment and you did everything right and then you put it on and the whole front of the shirt is like pulling to this side for absolutely no reason. Is it all making sense
We've
now?
all done it.
We've all done it. It comes from a good place. A lot of people look at how the fabric suggested layout is laid out and they say, I can squish so many pattern pieces in here. This is foolishness. And then they're, 45 degrees to the grain and 30 degrees to the grain and 0 degrees to the grain. So very, very similar to our grain line arrow is the cut on the fold bracket. The cut on the fold bracket is a line with two arrows that are facing the inside of the pattern. Here it is, just like that. The cut on the fold bracket assumes that the fold is on the grain line. So this is both a grain line indicator and a cut on the fold symbol. Why are we wanting to cut on the fold for certain pattern pieces?
Symmetry.
Yes, because humans are roughly symmetrical. So if you're doing the center front of a garment and you don't want to have a line here, you want it to be one piece, you're going to cut on the fold. And that way, when you cut it, it's even on both sides. Also saves you fabric, also saves you a ton of cutting. Great. Are we good with grain line? Are we good with cut on the fold? Am I good with making a huge mess because I can never fold patterns back the way they're supposed to be folded? Oh no.
No, everybody.
I'm convinced that pattern refolding could be an Olympic sport, and I would watch it. Most of my patterns that I've used before live in Ziploc baggies.
Yeah.
I don't even try. All right, choosing the right layout. When I open up this pattern, there are 15 layout options for functionally 4 different things. And you might be like, how do I choose? What's the difference? What is this insanity? Your layout options are going to depend on a few things. One of which is the width of your fabric. Most quilters cotton and fabrics similar to that are about 45 inches wide. And if you look at your fabric layouts, you'll see 45. Some fashion fabrics, including most of the ones I carry, are 60 inches wide. So you can fit more on the 60 and buy a shorter amount of fabric. Does that make sense? So it's the first thing you're gonna look. Is my fabric that I bought 45 or 60 inches wide? The second thing you're gonna look at is what is the pattern of my fabric? If you are doing a fabric with little hearts, they all have to be facing up.
You're not the only one.
Yeah, you're not the only one. On this poet shirt, it's white. If I cut one sleeve like this and the other sleeve like this, it doesn't matter as long as it's on the grain line. No one will ever know. However, if this was little puppy dogs, we would have one bunch of puppy dogs doing like this and a bunch of puppy dogs doing like this, right? So you have to look at the direction and the pattern. You also may sometimes need extra room for matching plaids up. If you want your plaids to match up, sometimes you have to be able to scooch your pattern pieces around. And that's another reason I like the Ditto. Because on the Ditto, you can see exactly where that line is and you don't have to move or peek under your paper to see if it's lining up.
Is that what's known as the nap?
No.
Oh, okay.
Do I have a fabric with nap? Okay, yeah, it's slight. You can't see it very well. This is corduroy. It's one of my very favorite fabrics. It's very fun, had a lot of texture. However, on corduroys, velvets,
Upholstery fabric.
that is where you get nap. So nap is when you brush it this way
Looks like
and it looks all smooth, but if you have another one next to it that was cut the other direction, yeah, so it's a little more subtle on this corduroy because the
Okay.
wale is so tiny, but on velvet,
yeah.
you're gonna see it big time. So you want to make sure that that is lined up too. So when we're doing choosing our pattern layout, we're choosing by 45 versus 60. We're choosing by patterns or plaid. We're choosing for direction or nap, and we're choosing for size. Some patterns will say, okay, if you're 4-6-8, you can use this layout because you can fit on this width of fabric. But if you're a 10, 12, 14, you have to use this layout because you can't fit these two pieces side by side. You're going to scoot it down. So I just talked about like all these options. We definitely want to, look and choose the right one depending on all those factors. However, here's the caveat. The pattern layout is not definitive. So if you did go thrifting and you have 2 cuts of the same fabric that you're going to try to use, you can puzzle piece them around until they fit as long as you follow the cardinal rule of grain line. So that is totally an acceptable practice, is to look at these layouts and say, you know what, this isn't gonna work for me. And shift them around like puzzle pieces until they do, as long as you obey the law of grain line. All right, so we kind of already talked about this one. I got ahead of myself. Your pattern pieces, which you've highlighted, they have numbers or they have names, they say front or back or left or right or whatever. I choose to leave mine on there until the last second. But as Deborah pointed out, you can also just mark on there what it is. But the important thing is to identify your pattern pieces before your cat comes and knocks everything off the cut table. Symmetry and mirroring. Each pattern piece is going to give you individual directions for that piece. Not just the grain line, which is so important, But also it will say cut 1 of fabric, cut 1 of lining. Or maybe it says cut 2 of fabric, cut 2 of interfacing. So sometimes when you're looking at a pattern piece, you're not just cutting 1 of something. You have to plan ahead. Now, a lot of the time, the fabric layout will help. If it's cut 2 of fabric, it's likely that if you look at your pattern layout, it asks you to cut it with the fabric folded over. So now when you cut 1, you get 2. You also need to be looking at sleeves, mirroring right versus left. Because if you are trying to Frankenstein a pattern together, which I've done, your sleeves need to be one on the right, like they need to be mirroring each other. Normally you get this without having to work at it because the fabric is doubled, wrong sides together or right sides together. So when you cut 1, you get a left and a right. But if you are in the habit of Frankensteining your pattern layouts, that's something you need to be aware of.
The lining has a grain line too.
The lining has a grain line too. Interfacing does not. Interfacing, you can even do, guilty. Interfacing, sometimes I'll need like this much and I have like this much. So I just like get a scrap piece of interfacing from somewhere else and just stick it on there and it's fine.
Yeah.
So interfacing doesn't have grain line, but lining does. Excellent question. All right, so are we good about symmetry and mirroring on fabric and how our pattern piece is gonna tell us what to do right on the pattern? We good? Cutting fabric. This stresses some people out, and I understand because you're like looking at it and you're like, oh my gosh, if I mess it up. There are actually several ways to cut fabric. One is to use pattern weights. Those are literally like people will just go and get nuts and bolts from the hardware store and wrap them in fabric and drop them on the corners of their fabric. Some people will use pins. I wouldn't use these. These are really short. These are applique pins, but this is a great brand. I use the clips after to clip my fabric to the pattern piece afterwards. So I can flip them easily.
I saw someone put a piece of galvanized metal underneath their, with magnets.
Yes, that was the next one I was going to mention. So you can just put a whole thing of metal underneath your cutting board and throw magnets on it. That's kind of the new way. I love that too. So if you're using a rotary cutter like this, which I used to never use on patterns, but once I got the Ditto, I was like, oh, hey, oh, I like this. This is good for the sweeping curves, those long lines that you line it up with the ruler. If you want to cut notches, though, you're going to still need your traditional scissors, any kind of dressmaker shears. And the trick to cutting accurately is to keep your fabric as flat on the surface as you can. I see a lot of people try to cut. They've got their scissors, they've got their pattern, they've got their fabric underneath it, and they lift the whole thing up like this. If you're lifting up like this, your pattern is sliding down the fabric. It's no longer a 1-for-1. Your fabric is now longer than it should be, or shorter.
Depends which way you're cutting.
Depends on which way you're cutting from.
It can be both.
That's where if you were using a rotary cutter, that step might be a little easier for you. Okay, so this is not full-on alterations. Full-on alterations happen after we've made our slope or our basic draft, right? This is, I know I'm too tall for this pattern. I know it for a fact. Don't even have to look. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look right here, see how the pattern continues on, but then right here, there's some lines. They will have lengthen or shorten here lines written on the pattern. And how much do we lengthen or shorten? We look at our envelope. And on your envelope, you're going to have sizing and yardage, and then you're going to have finished measurement. So your finished measurements, they're telling you what the garment's going to be when it's done, including the ease. And a lot of the time on there, it'll have your bust, your neck to waist back length. And I compare those against my own measurements, and I know if my neck to waist back length is 20, and the pattern says the finished product is going to be 17, I know that on the torso piece, I'm going to have to cut on that lengthen line and add a couple of inches. There's a product I really like for that, and I should have grabbed it. Oh yeah. Pattern paper.
Oh yeah.
It's good for making copies of patterns you use a lot. My mom has pattern paper copies of pajama pants that are 15 years old at this point. It's also good for drafting your own patterns. It's also good for using, for altering your patterns because you feel it, you can draw on it, you can cut through it, but it's not going to rip easy. Tables stick to it. This was great. I usually buy a bolt and it's on sale. What I would do is I would cut this line open and I would put that 2-inch block in there. But you might instead need to cut that line open and overlap it by 1 inch to shorten it.
Okay.
See what I mean? So they have cut and lengthen here. They have darts, and that can be adjusted, darts and seams. So I also talked about grading patterns. Okay, so here we have a top, right? It goes from a size large to a size extra large. So around my chest line, my bust line, I am a large. And on my hip line, I'm an extra large. We know this is where the waistline is. I know that that shift happens at about the waist to hip. So I'm going to take the ruler and I'm going to curve this out to the extra large line.
So I heard they have those French curved rulers that you use.
Yes,
Those make life easier.
they do. The other option that you have for adjusting things is moving and changing your darts. So we'll probably work on that with the shirt a little bit. Some people that are generously endowed, Dolly Parton style, will need a side dart put in to give them a little more room and generosity in this area. But if you carry your weight differently, that dart might need to shift down. It might need to grow or shrink to fit your body. And like I said, some of these things, after you've been sewing for a while, you can see right on the pattern where to change them. And you can change them right away. I'm not even going to look at the pattern. I'm going to add 2 inches to everything. But as you're starting out, you might change some things that are obvious. Like if you're, like I said, if you're shorter, if you're one size here and one size here. But there are other things that you're just going to have to make out of a cheap fabric and then adjust.
Is that where you suggest maybe getting a muslin? Because some people use muslin and
Exactly.
yeah.
And it could be fabric that you have in your stock. And I do this a lot too. I'll be like, this top is so cute. And I have the exact perfect fabric I have to make it out of. But I have this other fabric that I like and I would totally wear as a top. It's cute. But I don't want to run my really perfect fabric. So I'll make it out of the fabric that I'm like, I would wear it. I like it, but I'm not like in love with it. Instead of muslin. Because then if it works out,
You stole the top.
I have 2 cute tops. If it doesn't work out, we won't talk about it. We have 1 cute top. So make a practice garment from an expensive fabric. And you got this right on your patterns. Make notes in the pattern thing. Alter your pattern to fit your wonky measurements. Sewing is supposed to be a creative expression format. So there are certain lines that I strongly suggest you follow, like the grade line, but there are a ton of areas in sewing where you can really change your approach and get away with a lot. And so don't be afraid to experiment, would be my advice as somebody who's done a lot of garment clothing. Let's talk briefly about slopers. I didn't put slopers in here. Slopers are the basic form, most watered down version of the thing. So if you have a dress sloper, it is literally the sheath that goes over your body. Not fancy, no collars, no craziness. It is just the sheath that fits your body. If you have a pants sloper, it is the pants that don't have the pockets and the fly and the loops on the waistband. It's just the basic shape to fit your body. Now, if you're going to get really into sewing, it is advised that you have a basic sloper that you know fits. Because once you have that, understanding how to make modifications on other patterns becomes a lot easier. So if you know your sloper that fits you perfectly, has this bust measurement and fits best with a side dart right here that's 1.5 inches, you can now apply that knowledge to any commercial pattern. So that's kind of like a whole thing. Maybe that's what we do next semester is make your perfect sloper and like absolutely nail it.
Please.
Because that's kind of the shortcut to unlocking things that fit you perfectly every time. Also, if you become a pattern drafter, you can take that sloper, build your own pattern. You no longer need these. You're looking at it and you're like, that's a Peter Pan collar. I can put that on my sloper. I know how to do that. So that's kind of the other advantage to having a really well-fit sloper. Who knows the difference between pattern drafting and draping?
can guess. The
Yeah.
pattern drafting is you take all on paper, just do it all on paper. Drafting is where you put it on the little mannequin and go
Exactly.
this part like this.
And you have to, a lot of people are like, oh, pattern drafting is complicated. I don't want to do that. I just want to drape. You're following the same rules. You're doing it a different way. So pattern drafting is taking those measurements from a 3D body, putting them on a 2D form of paper, and bringing it back to the 3D when you sew it together. Draping, you're taking a 3D model, and you're still having to obey things like drape line and drape and symmetry that we talked about in building this pattern, but you're pinning it directly onto the pattern. And then you're going to like pin and sew. So those are two different skills. I am a more competent pattern drafter. That's just where I've had more experience personally. I do know how to drape. This dress was a drape project.
When you cut out your notches,
Mhm.
you match them up to the same notches on another piece that you have cut out, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's why we want to bump out if we can instead of bumping it. Because if you bump in, you're cutting into your seam allowance.
Yeah.
And if you bump out, you can feel them and see them as you pin them together. But if you mark them, you may have to flip the edge of your fabric a little bit to see your mark before you sew it together. So there's, like I said, this is one of those rules that you can bend but not. We're going to use a variation of a commercial pattern on the pants project. Either you can do a straight up pajama pant, in which case you're going to go 100% with the commercial pattern. Or you're going to make the smocked pant, which is a variation on a commercial pattern. So you're still using the commercial pattern base, but I'm showing you how to modify it slightly. And when we get to our poet shirt, you're using a pattern. Straight up. We're gonna learn pattern right from the go, start to end, including reading the directions, highlighting, doing all that stuff. We may skip a couple steps on the pajama pants because they're so simple. They're 2 pieces of fabric. You know, so that like where I'm like meticulously label each piece as you cut it.
Left leg right.
Is it? Yeah. Which one is it? You're probably okay. We're gonna let you fuzz those rules. All the rules except for grain line. That one is the law. But on the so on that project, we're gonna ease into it. On the poet shirt, 100% pattern, start to finish. We're gonna follow every step that I talked about tonight. And then on the skirt, you are making the pattern. So you are putting the notches in, and you are labeling it, and you are marking the grain line. So that's gonna be really fun. That's gonna be 100% you, and I'm just gonna be here being like, yeah. And then on the blouse, we're gonna commercial pattern again. Welcome back to Present Day Me. I hope that class was awesome and you learned a lot. If you have any questions, just drop them in the comments below. I'm so excited to be able to help my friends here in class and online. I want to do a big special thank you to all the students in this class that are letting me use their voices and their amazing questions to help you guys out at home. And you waited for it, so here's the sneak peek. Next week, we're going to learn how to do fabric shopping. Now, I know a lot of you are at home saying, I am so good at spending money on fabric, but we're actually going to go a little more in depth than that. There are different kinds of fabric fibers and treatments that are good for different types of clothing. So we're going to decode all that next week.